A surge in missile and drone attacks by Russia and Ukraine, with civilians killed on both sides. Little movement on the diplomatic front, while U.S. attention is largely focused on Iran. So, what's next for Europe's worst conflict since World War II? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. During his re-election campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly said he'd end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of his return to the White House. Yet, after more than 4 years of Europe's worst conflict since the Second World War, there's little sign of peace. Recent weeks have seen an intensification by both sides, with more civilian deaths. The upsurge is in contrast to the lack of movement on the diplomatic front. Trump's focus has largely shifted to his war with Iran, yet countries like Turkey have expressed renewed alarm about the dangers of the Ukraine-Russia war escalating. So, where is this conflict heading? What's the strategy now in Kyiv and Moscow? And is the U.S. still critical to ending this war? We'll speak to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
A huge Russian attack launched in the early hours of Wednesday. 24 ballistic missiles, 115 drones, bombarding sites across the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and its surrounding region. Residential buildings, a railway station, warehouses, all hit.
You couldn't even hear that it was a missile. I don't even know what it was, but you couldn't hear the missile itself. The blast wave just hit the cab. It's a good thing we managed to get out of the truck.
Rescuers worked for hours to put out fires caused by the attacks. Russia says the strikes targeted transport and distribution centers used for military supplies. The Ukrainian president says all of the targets were civilian-owned and not part of the war.
Some very loud explosions were heard. It just felt like they were right next to us or even at the warehouse.
It's one of the worst attacks by Russia this year, as the nearly 5-year-long war shows no signs of slowing down. Russia has intensified its large-scale strikes in recent weeks. So too has Ukraine. Kyiv has increased its strikes on Russian oil refineries, energy facilities, and civilian infrastructure. More than a dozen warehouses of Russian retail giant Wildberries have been targeted in recent weeks. Ukraine says they're used to support Russia's military. Moscow denies that. 5 people were killed and 10 wounded in a warehouse strike on Tuesday morning.
The adversary has publicly stated that the attacks on Wildberries are aimed at ordinary citizens. Their sole objective is to exert pressure, destabilise the situation, and trigger panic and shock among a large number of people.
On Monday, 7 people were killed, including 3 children, when a drone hit a busy beach in southern Russia. UN monitors say civilian casualties are at their highest levels since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. Both sides deny deliberately targeting civilians. The Ukrainian president says lives could have been saved. Ukraine is critically low on interceptor missiles and has been pleading for more supplies from its allies for months. Meeting U.S. President Donald Trump last week, Zelensky again lobbied for the licenses to produce the missiles domestically, something Trump has consistently given mixed signals on. The EU announced another $1.6 billion from frozen Russian assets will be used to support Ukraine as the bloc moves more towards weapons supplies and sanctions. With Trump largely focusing on the Iran war, there's been little movement on the diplomatic front. Reports say his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, may visit Kyiv later this month, a first for them after multiple trips to Moscow. Alexandra Byers, Aljazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. In Moscow, Andrey Kortunov, a Russian affairs analyst and a former director general of the Russian International Affairs Council. In Kyiv, Oleksiy Goncharenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament. And in New York, Thomas Graham, a Henry A. Kissinger Distinguished Fellow at the Council on foreign relations. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Thomas, let me start with you today. You wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times in which you said that while President Trump is focused on Iran, a propitious moment to be the peacemaker in the Russia-Ukraine war could be slipping away. If the U.S. does not re-engage in a serious way, where do you see all this heading?
Well, it's a continuation of what we reported at the top of the story. We're in an escalatory cycle at this point. The warfare is intensifying, but it's also spreading. There are attacks in the Black Sea that we haven't seen for some time. The Ukrainians have attacked ships in the Caspian, for example. And we also hear, I think, increasing concerns about a wider war in Europe and in Moscow itself. So in the absence of a serious negotiating sequence at this point, what we're going to see, I fear, is a continuation of the escalation, which always carries the threat of a wider war.
Oleksiy, as we heard in that report a few minutes ago from Alexander Byers, there are reports emerging that U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner may make their first visit to Kyiv in the second half of August. Witkoff, of course, has traveled to Russia several times. Kushner accompanied Witkoff to Russia on at least one occasion. President Zelensky has in the past been critical of the fact that, Witkoff and Kushner have not yet visited Kyiv. If they do end up coming to Kyiv, what does that signal to you?
Hello, we need peace as soon as possible in Ukraine, and Ukraine is ready to stop the war right now on the current lines. This proposal is actual already for a year and a half, and the only reason why the war continues is because Russia doesn't want to stop. So it's quite natural that at the beginning, American efforts were more concentrated on Moscow because Ukraine is ready to end the war. We didn't start it, and we are ready to end it right now. Russia started this war and doesn't want to stop. So the United States should put a real pressure on Putin, and that I hope they will do. In any way, I can only welcome if Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner will visit Ukraine. But what we are interested in, not just in visits themselves, we are interested in the result, in ending this war. And for this, I will repeat, the world should put a real pressure on Russia, because this is the side because of which the war continues.
Andrey, how would President Putin view a visit by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Kyiv? And does President Putin at this stage believe that Donald Trump is offering Moscow its best bet for some type of positive deal or outcome when it comes to the war with Ukraine?
Well, I think that in Moscow the feelings are mixed, because on the one hand it is clear that you cannot reach a peace agreement without engaging Ukraine directly. So in theory, the Russian authorities should welcome contacts between the United States and Ukraine. But on the other hand, there is also a feeling in Moscow that Trump did not deliver what he allegedly promised Putin at their meeting a year ago in Anchorage, Alaska. Again, the rumor is that they agreed on a potential compromise, but Trump did not manage to sell this deal to Ukrainians or to Europeans. Whether it is right or wrong, we don't know, but at least that is the sentiment that we have here in this city.
Andrey, let me ask you, from your vantage point, is President Putin interested in a negotiated deal at this stage when it comes to Ukraine, or at this stage would he just prefer to fight it out on the battlefield?
Well, I think that definitely he would like to cut a deal, but on his own terms. And these terms, among other things, involve full control over the remaining parts of Donbass, which are still in the hands of the Ukrainian army. I think that for Putin, who made many statements that Donbass would come under Russian control, it is now very difficult to step back from his commitment to take the remaining territory of this region.
Oleksiy, I want to try to get a little bit of an overview from your vantage point of where things are when it comes to the fighting. As we mentioned, Russia has been increasing its attacks against Ukraine. Ukraine's been increasing its attacks against Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on allies to provide more missile interceptors to his country. Those air defense systems, they are vital for Ukraine's ability to intercept Russian ballistic missiles. Do you expect that Ukraine will actually be getting more of those interceptors?
I hope so, because the price is the lives of people. This night, 17 people were killed just because Ukraine doesn't have a possibility today to intercept Russian ballistic missiles. And these countries, United States and our other partners, they are our allies. And I would remind you that United States is not just voluntarily supporting Ukraine, but also I will remind you about Budapest Memorandum, which was signed in 1994, where United States, United Kingdom, and Russia, Russia, yes, they signed that Ukraine, which voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons, will receive the guarantees from these countries of its security and territorial integrity. Russia clearly violated everything, but United States and United Kingdom, they have commitment to support Ukraine in such situation. Unfortunately, today we don't have enough support, and the Ukrainians are dying because of this. And also, I think because of this, the lack of these missiles encourages Putin, because Putin thinks that he has some upper hand in this war right now because of, for example, lack of such ballistic missiles for Ukraine. So if we want to stop the war and to show to Putin that he will not achieve his goals, we need to give more support to Ukraine right now.
Oleksiy, let me follow up with you on some of the points you're making. You're saying that getting these interceptor missiles are crucial. At that NATO summit that happened in Turkey in July, President Trump indicated that he might grant Kyiv a license to produce Patriot surface-to-air interceptor missiles. Now it seems that Trump may be backtracking, that maybe he's unsure if Washington will actually grant Ukraine the license that they would need in order to produce those missiles. What would Ukraine do if they get a no from Washington? How does that impact things going forward? And beyond that, even if they were granted that license, it's not as if those interceptor missiles could be produced quickly. It would still take some time. What to do in the meantime?
Absolutely. The license doesn't mean that we will have them quickly, and we need them quickly. We need them right now. We need them yesterday. What will be the consequences? For Ukraine, it's clear we will lose more people and more destructions will be in Ukraine. But I want to tell you and the viewers of your respected channel what will be the consequences for the whole world. Russia is using these ballistic missiles not just to attack capital and civilian infrastructure. Also, recently, Russia used a lot of missiles and drones and everything to attack port infrastructure of Odessa and around in Ukraine on the Black Sea. And Odessa is one of the biggest agricultural ports in the world. And Ukraine is one of the biggest exporters of agricultural goods to the world. And according to estimations of United Nations, 400 million people in the world are dependent from calories from Ukrainian crops. Just imagine the number. So if we will not receive this help, if Odessa ports, Ukrainian Black Sea ports will not be protected, and the commercial navigation, which stopped almost 2 weeks ago, will not be restored, the food prices in the world will go up. And that will mean inflation in richer countries, but that will mean starvation and social instability and people dying in poorer countries. So the consequences will be felt by absolutely everybody on the planet.
Thomas, you've also written that intensive negotiations are urgently needed to seize the moment and end the conflict. But I want to ask you, does the U.S. actually have the credibility to lead this kind of an effort at this point? I'm asking you this because there are often questions about if Donald Trump is supporting Zelensky at one moment or if he prefers Putin at another moment. I mean, can the U.S. actually play an even-keeled role in negotiations considering how things have gone in the past?
Well, certainly there are a lot of questions about that. But I think the United States really is the only country that can play an even keel at this point. We can talk to people in Moscow. We can talk to people in Kiev. We can talk to European leaders as well. What is needed, as I argue in my piece, is an intense diplomatic effort. I think it is imperative that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner fly to Kiev to have the types of conversations that are needed at this point to get a sense of where things stand. But then they need to go to Moscow as well to see where Putin's thinking is at this point, and then begin a serious process of shuttle diplomacy to try to narrow what are yawning gaps between the two sides. I think this can be done, but it requires a real effort on the part of the United States at this point, something we haven't seen up to now. The question really is whether President Trump believes that there is an opportunity to bring this conflict to an end, and he's prepared to put behind it the type of diplomatic effort that is necessary to bring the two sides to resolution.
Thomas, do you think that Trump has people around him at the moment that are actively pushing him to try to engage more directly when it comes to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Is that something he's hearing a lot from allies or members of his administration?
I believe that certainly he's hearing it from allies. He's hearing it from the Kremlin. He's hearing it from Kiev, that they want the United States to re-engage. But I also believe that there are voices inside the White House that understand that this is a time to re-engage, that this conflict is in a dangerous escalatory cycle. But at the same time, it's ripe for solution, given the devastating consequences of continued conflict for both Moscow and Kiev at this point. The question is, what is the president going to do? He has made comments over the past several weeks about re-engaging, but he hasn't taken that step yet. But I think the pressure inside the White House is mounting.
Andrey, when it comes to President Putin and other Russian officials, who do they think would be able to credibly mediate in a future negotiation? I mean, is it just the U.S.? Is there any trust when it comes to European countries or specific European countries? Would Russia only want to deal with the U.S.? What does the Russian idea of mediation look like?
Well, there are rumors here that some initial contacts between a number of European countries and Russia have been reinstalled, and that allegedly there are some consultations in Vienna or in Baku or in other places that might pave the way for more substantive discussions, not only of how this conflict should end, but also about the future of the European security architecture. However, it is clear that Russia and Europe are really divided on this issue, and there is no flexibility on either side that would suggest that any compromise between Russia and Europe is already in the making. I think that in Moscow they still perceive Europe mostly as a part of a problem rather than a part of solution, and the standard narrative coming from the Kremlin is that it is only because Europe supports Ukraine for 4.5 years this conflict lasts for so long. I don't think that there has been a change in this narrative. So even if we are talking about renewed contacts between Moscow and European capitals, we are just in the very beginning of a very long and arguably very painful process.
Andrey, let me also just ask you about the fact that Ukraine's attacks on Russia have not just continued, but they're having even more of an impact deeper inside of Russia. That's what's going on in the last period. Reports have emerged for some time that there could be divisions within the Kremlin and among Russian elites when it comes to the direction of the war going forward. Do you think that President Putin is under mounting pressure to end this war? And is there a real sense of fatigue amongst the public in Russia when it comes to this war?
Well, definitely there is a sense of fatigue about the general public, but I'm not sure that the Russian leadership is really split on this issue. The decision-making process is highly centralized in Russia, and I think the system still has a margin of safety. We are now expecting elections to the Russian parliament to take place in mid-September, and this election might reflect the moods in the country. But frankly, I would be very surprised to see any kind of opposition to challenge the Russian leadership directly at this juncture.
Oleksiy, President Zelensky has of late been encountering opposition at home. There were demonstrations because of these recent dismissals of the defense minister and then the head of the armed forces. There was controversy about all of that, dissatisfaction. How much could all of that play into Zelensky's ability to continue either fighting the war or trying to negotiate peace?
Ukraine is democracy. in comparison with Russia, which is autocracy or tyranny, we could say there is no democracy there. So in Ukraine, what society thinks is very important. But if we're speaking about end of the war, so here there is no any intrigue. I mean, people want the war to end, and Ukraine is ready to end this war, as I told you, from the beginning of last year, when Ukraine agreed to stop the war on the current lines, not demanding for Russian forces to leave Ukrainian territory. But we are ready to end this war right now. Yes, Zelensky, there is a lot of pressure on him internally, domestically, and he made a number of mistakes. But it doesn't mean that he can't continue the war, because it's not the war of Zelensky. It's the war for existence for Ukrainians, because Russia is committing genocide on occupied territories against Ukrainians. And we all in Ukraine, we all know what will be the price of failure for Ukraine. Russians will just kill people like me, and then they will take our children to attack other European countries. So we will never surrender, and it's not an option for us at all. So that's the situation inside Ukraine.
Thomas, I could be wrong, but it looked to me like you were reacting to some of what Oleksiy was saying there. Did you want to jump in? If you did, please go ahead.
No, I said, look, I mean, it's a difficult situation in Kiev. I think that's absolutely true. And the Ukrainians have shown, I think, tremendous bravery over the past 4.5 years in defending their sovereignty and independence. They are not going to back down, even if the United States doesn't provide the level of support that they expect. But this is exactly why we need negotiations at this point. We have a difficult political situation in Kiev. I think there's an interesting situation in Moscow, perhaps a bit more fluid than Andrey indicated. You test the ability of the two sides to move towards a resolution through really intense negotiations. I think the United States is the only country that can conduct those. And so it's imperative that the White House move in that direction. I think the opportunity is here now, but it's not going to be here forever. So the ball is in the White House course, and we'll be looking, I think, quite intensely to see what decisions President Trump makes in the next few days.
Thomas, if the White House does decide to move in that direction more forcefully, is there a scenario that exists in which, if the war were to somehow come to an end, that each side could claim victory?
Well, that is, I think, what the negotiations are about. This war will end when both sides can claim victory in some way. I think the case for the Ukrainians, Oleksiy, may have a different view, but I think Zelensky has the opportunity to achieve what is most precious for Ukrainians, and that is the preservation of the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine and its European ambitions. For Russia, I think what Putin would claim at the end is that Russia was able to hold off the onslaught of the entire collective West, and that's a tremendous victory, and also liberate certain Russians from what he calls a neo-Nazi regime in Kiev. So I think it's possible to think of what victory speeches would look like. But again, the question and issue really is the negotiated solution, and that does require the United States to step in, I believe.
Oleksiy, you heard there Thomas talking about there being a need for the U.S. to really forcefully step into this if negotiations could get back on track. I want to ask you if there's concern being expressed by President Zelensky or members of his inner circle about the fact that Donald Trump is facing midterm elections in the U.S. coming up in the next few months, and that is something that, depending on which way it goes, could limit his power in the Oval Office. Is that something that is concerning to Ukrainians right now, about how much support Trump could basically have going forward, even if he wants to be more forceful about getting Russia and Ukraine to the table?
First, I want to agree that without the United States, it's hard to imagine how this war will end. And the United States are absolutely crucial and vital, their efforts in peacemaking here. So there are just two countries in the world which Putin is afraid of, Russia is afraid of. It's United States and China. China doesn't want to play an active role, at least for the moment. So all our hopes are on the United States, that they will help us to achieve peace. And I don't think that midterms can change something here, because I think there is a consensus both in Republican and Democratic Party that the war in Ukraine should end. And the war should end in the way that Ukraine will remain a sovereign, independent state, an ally of the United States and the Eastern Europe. So I think here there is a consensus. And the only thing about midterms, maybe that will push more President Trump now to act, because that can be a big success for him before elections, if he will manage to end this war, how he promised during the electoral campaign.
Andrey, we only have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you essentially the same question as I was asking Oleksiy there. In Russia, amongst President Putin and his advisors, is there any concern about the fact that there are midterm elections coming up in the U.S. and that could potentially impact how Trump deals with all this going forward?
I think that there are concerns that if Democrats get control over one or two chambers of the U.S. Congress, Trump might have his hands tied, and he might be deprived of the flexibility that he enjoys right now. And Democrats definitely are stronger in their support of Ukraine than Republicans are. So in this sense, time is not on the side of Donald Trump or on the side of the compromise. However, of course, there are doubts in Moscow that Donald Trump really wants a compromise. There are still hesitations about his real intentions, since his statements are not always consistent and sometimes are mutually exclusive.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Andrey Kortunov, Oleksiy Goncharenko, and Thomas Graham. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it for me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.